Morning of August 7th, 1990. 2,300 soldiers of the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division had assembled. They boarded C-Series transport aircraft, departed from North Carolina, headed for Saudi Arabia. Thus began Operation Desert Shield. After 5 months of intense sea and air transport, by early January, total U.S. troop strength in the Gulf region reached 527,000, including 295,000 Army personnel, 94,000 Marines, 82,000 Navy personnel, 56,000 Air Force personnel, 2,200 tanks were deployed, 2,000 armored vehicles, 2,800 aircraft, plus coalition forces from over 30 countries. Total strength exceeded 700,000. Such a massive force had only one goal: to drive Saddam out of Kuwait. Welcome to Chris Military Base, focusing on major famous battles. Today, let's talk about the first phase of the Gulf War, Operation Desert Shield. To understand why Saddam was attacked by a multinational coalition, we must rewind the timeline a bit. In 1988, Iraqi President Saddam signed a ceasefire agreement, ending the bloody 8-year war with Iran. Iraq suffered 600,000 casualties. Not only did it fail to make progress on the battlefield, it also incurred huge debts. Foreign debt alone reached $80 billion. Rebuilding the destroyed regions would cost another $230 billion for Iraq's already fragile economy. This was a severe blow. Even worse, global oil prices remained low, and Iraq heavily relied on oil exports. Government finances were in chaos. This was a serious threat to Saddam's dictatorship. His million-strong army was the fourth largest in the world. Annual military spending alone accounted for 40% of the GDP. If the government couldn't even support its army, then Saddam would no longer be able to maintain his violent regime. Facing this dilemma, Saddam turned his gaze to his little neighbor. In May 1990, in Baghdad, the capital of Iraq, Saddam met with his neighbor, Kuwait's head of state, Jaber al-Sabah. Jaber ruled one of the richest countries on earth, though small in size. Kuwait held 10% of the world's oil reserves. Facing internal troubles, Saddam blamed his problems on Kuwait. He accused Kuwait of deliberately lowering oil prices, flooding the market with cheap oil. This action pushed Iraq deeper into economic crisis. Later that day, Saddam issued a stern warning to Jaber. He said that every $1 drop in oil price meant a loss of $1 billion in revenue per year for Iraq. If you don't want war with Iraq, then stop it. But in fact, during the Iran-Iraq War, Kuwait had been very careful in supporting Iraq. They provided Iraq with $15 billion to purchase weapons, and even allowed Iraq to use Kuwait's small airfield as a military base. These efforts were to show goodwill, to prevent Iraq from harassing them. But unexpectedly, their generosity was like a gust of wind that only further fueled Saddam's ambitions, burning even more fiercely. This time, Kuwait decided not to give in. In response to Saddam's demands, Jaber did not give in much and took a firm stance. A month later, Saddam's inner circle decided unless Kuwait handed over $10 billion to Iraq, Iraq would invade immediately. For Saddam, after the Iran-Iraq War ended, the only thing he had left was a battle-hardened army, a terrifying army. All he needed to do was to find a suitable target for this force and divert public attention abroad. This is a trick often used by authoritarians. Saddam did exactly that. Under his incitement, Iraqis genuinely believed their suffering was caused by the Kuwaitis. Many people in Baghdad took to the streets, demanding Saddam punish Kuwait. According to then Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz, invading Kuwait was Iraq's only choice at the time.
Iraq had no choice but to act, either to be destroyed, to be suffocated and strangled inside its territory, or attack the enemy on the outside.
In July 1990, the Republican Guard moved south toward the border. These were Iraq's elite troops, equipped with Soviet tanks in the Middle East. Besides Israel, no other country had the power to counter them. At the same time, U.S. spy satellites in the Persian Gulf captured the military movement. According to satellite images, Iraq was amassing troops along its southern border. However, this action did not immediately attract U.S. attention because Iraq was only mobilizing forces within its own territory and had not built up logistical support units, nor had it set up major communication systems. There was no direct evidence that Iraq was planning war. The Americans believed that to deal with a small country like Kuwait, even a police force would be sufficient. There was no need to overreact. They thought Saddam was just showing off, but other Middle Eastern countries weren't as optimistic as the Americans. After all, those troops were practically on their doorstep. Soon, Iraq had gathered 30,000 troops at the Kuwaiti border. The crisis escalated quickly. Egyptian President Mubarak rushed to Baghdad on behalf of the Arab world to arrange negotiations. Mubarak was one of America's closest allies in the region. He was determined to figure out what Saddam was up to.
I met with Saddam Hussein. He met me in the airport. Then he took me in the car. He was driving, this inside him, nobody with us. Until we went to one of the palaces near the lake there. And we went upstairs to the first floor, tete-a-tete, in a big room. And we were both alone, nobody with us. I asked him about what the problem, what's happening. I told him, do you have any intention to attack them, invade them? He told me, no, but don't tell the Kuwaits about it. It was a very clear answer.
This meeting had far-reaching effects. As soon as Mubarak left Baghdad, he called the White House immediately and said Saddam was bluffing. Mubarak told Bush Sr. that Iraq only wanted money. Saddam was just showing military might. He advised the U.S. not to get involved. The Arab world would handle this on its own. However, just a day after meeting Mubarak, Saddam summoned the U.S. ambassador to Iraq to test America's stance on the matter. The response he got made Saddam quite satisfied. U.S. Ambassador Gillespie reiterated the State Department's position to Saddam. This was hardly tantamount to a warning shot across the bow. She said, "We're watching you. We're concerned about the bellicose statements that you've been issuing. But our fundamental feeling is that we have no Arab disputes, including the dispute you're having with the Kuwaitis over." After the meeting, Saddam announced more talks will be held with the Kuwaitis. Gillespie randomly informed Washington. During the meeting, Saddam himself was a bit panicked, not knowing how to wrap things up. At this point, it was appropriate to reduce public criticism of Iraq. Don't overreact. This news quickly reached Bush Sr. and Baker. At this moment, after discussion, the White House agreed that although the crisis wasn't over, it had basically peaked. However, at the same time, Iraq was accelerating troop deployments to the border, rising from 30,000 to 100,000 soldiers. Even so, Arab leaders still believed Saddam was just bluffing, not daring to start a war recklessly. As time passed, the deadline set by Saddam soon arrived. August 1st, 1990, Kuwait proposed paying Iraq $500 million as compensation, but this amount was far less than Saddam's $10 billion demand. That afternoon, Iraq began massing troops, launching an attack on Kuwait. At the same time, U.S. spy satellites showed the bases once filled with hundreds of Iraqi tanks were now completely empty. Armed helicopters were pulled from runways. Without a doubt, the Republican Guard had fully mobilized. The U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, upon receiving this news, immediately issued a Level 1 alert. At this point, Americans finally understood that Saddam wasn't just posturing. He really intended to invade Kuwait. Now that things had reached this point, politicians in the White House began advising the president, trying to stop the war at the last minute. Instead of calling Saddam, to urge him to think twice. Yet right at that moment, news from Kuwait reached the White House. Kuwait had been bombed. The war had already begun.